Hey gang, and welcome back. Just a reminder, you can use the promo code MTGMudsta at flipsidegaming.com. You'll get 10% off orders of $10 or more, and help with the channel at the same time. You could also consider turning off your ad blocker when watching my videos. Today's game is a bit of an interesting one with no green and no red. I asked Eric to build a Daxos third turn deck, and he did and lent it to me, and I kept an opener with Sorin Lord of Innistrad, 2 plains, Mana Crypt, Scrubland, End Hostilities, and Enlightened Tutor. Jason is playing his cool color Gisa deck and keeps a Soul Ring, Swiftfoot Boots, Tortured Existence, Army of the Damned, Noxious Ghoul, Crypt Breaker, and a Swamp. Jameson is playing Zur and keeps Sunken Hollow, Exotic Orchard, 2 plains, Pact of Negation, Brainstorm, and Pariah. Lastly, Zach has joined me from Toronto and he's playing Chainer, keeping 2 Swamps, Oblivion Stone, Soul Ring, Hero's Downfall, Exsanguinate, and Yawgmoth's Will. I win the die roll and I start us off. I play a Scrubland, and I pass turn. Jameson plays a Tap Sunken Hollow and passes. Zach plays a Swamp, and he casts Soul Ring. Jason, not to be outdone by Zach, plays his own Swamp, his own Soul Ring, but finishes with a Swiftfoot Boots. I play a Plains, and I cast Mana Crypt. I then tap out to cast Sorin Lord of Innistrad, and uptick him to make a 1/1 Vampire token with lifelink. Jameson plays an Exotic Orchard, and casts a Brainstorm. Zach plays an Oblivion Stone in his main phase, and then drops a Swamp. Jason drops a Swamp as well, and he casts Crypt Breaker. He makes 2 colorless from his Soul Ring, using 1 to equip the boots onto the Crypt Breaker, then taps his remaining Swamp to pay for Crypt Breaker's activated ability with the colorless. He discards a Noxious Ghoul and makes a 2/2 zombie token. I don't take any damage from my Mana Crypt trigger, and I play a Plains for my turn, and I cast Daxos. I then uptick Sorin to make another Vampire token, and I hit Zach for 1 while gaining 1. Jameson plays a Tapped Hall of the Bandit Lord and passes to Zach. Zach simply plays a Swamp and he passes. Jason draws for turn and doesn't have a land. Moving to combat, he swings his zombie token at Zach, and I respond to the damage by casting Enlightened Tutor. I grab a land tax while Jason passes turn after the damage is done. I lose 3 life to my Mana Crypt trigger, and I draw the land tax that I put on top of my library. In my first main phase, I cast land tax. I gain 1 experience counter, and downtick Sorin to gain an emblem that gives all of my creatures +1/+0. Zach pops the Stonewall abilities on the stack, and I float 2 colorless mana with the Crypt, and everything gets destroyed. Before moving to my now pointless combat step, I use the 2 colorless mana and my 2 lands to cast Solemn Simulacrum, going to find a basic, and then passing to Jameson. Jameson plays a Plains, and takes 3 to cast Zur with the mana from his Hall of the Bandit Lord. He swings Zur at Zach, and gets the Tutor for an enchantment. He puts Steel of the Godhead onto Zur and deals 3 commander damage to Zach and gains 3 life. Zach plays a Swamp for his turn and he passes. Jason still has no land to play, but he can still cast a Withered Wretch before passing to me. I play a Swamp for my turn and I recast my Daxos. I smoothly move to combat and swing my Solemn at Jameson for 3. With nothing else, I pass, but Zach uses his chance to take out Zur with a Hero's Downfall. Jameson plays a Plains and he casts Propaganda. He then passes to Zach. Zach plays a Swamp, and he casts Chainer. Jason is still struggling with hitting those lands, and he casts a Tortured Existence before passing to me. I draw for turn, and I play a Swamp. I then cast Profane Procession, gaining another experience counter. Moving to combat, I swing the Solemn at Zach for 3. At the end of my turn, Jameson gets some revenge with Swords to Plowshares targeting Zach's Chainer. Zach gains 3 life as Chainer goes back to the command zone. Jameson plays a Library of Leng in his main phase, and he casts Oblivion Ring on my Procession. With nothing else, he passes turn. Zach draws for turn, and he plays a Swamp. He passes to Jason, who at the end of turn activates his Tortured Existence and discards Geth to return the Crypt Breaker to his hand. Jason draws for turn, but who needs lands when you can cast Crypt Breaker for 1? He passes to me, and at the end of turn, I activate Daxos to make an enchantment spirit token whose power and toughness are equal to my experience counters. I cast an Imperial Seal in my main phase, taking 2 damage to go and find a card. I find a card and put it on top of my library. I then cast Necropotence, gaining another experience counter. I pay 5 life into Necropotence and put aside 5 cards, one of which being the one I just tutored for. Moving to combat, I swing my enchantment creature at Jason for 4 and my Solemn at Zach for 3. They each take the hit, and I pass my turn, putting the cards I'd put to the side with Necropotence into my hand. Jameson casts Deep Freeze in his main phase, enchanting my Daxos and rendering him useless. With nothing else, he passes to Zach. Zach plays a Swamp, and he passes turn. Jason still can't find a land for turn and has to resort to casting Reanimate to bring back his noxious ghoul. He loses 5 life to bring the zombie back, and all non-zombie creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn. Jason then passes to me. I skip my draw step and I play a Plains. I then move to combat, paying 4 mana to swing 2 creatures at Jameson, who takes the hit for 7. In my second main phase, I cast Oppression, which sadly doesn't give me another experience counter, and I pass to Jameson. Jameson plays an island, and he recasts Zur, taking 3 from the hull. He swings Zur at Zach, and grabs his own copy of Necropotence. Zach takes 1, and in his second main phase, we realize Jameson needed to discard a card to Oppression. He chose to do so, and puts it on top of his library thanks to the Library of Lang ability. He then puts 3 life into Necropotence, and puts 3 cards into his hand at the end of turn. Zach draws for turn, and casts his own Necropogen Mists. He discards a Living Death to the Oppression, and he drops a Reliquary Tower. At the end of Zach's turn, Jason taps his 3 zombies, losing 1 life and drawing a card to Cryptbreaker's ability. Jason discards Army the Damned to the Necrogen Mist trigger and still can't draw a land. He taps his 3 zombies again to Cryptbreaker's ability, losing 1 life and drawing a card. It's not a land, but he is able to cast a Phyrexian Reclamation, discarding Coat of Arms to the Oppression trigger. I discard Worship to the Necrogen Mist triggers, exiling it because of Necropotence. I drop a Godless Shrine from my land for turn, taking 2 to have it come into play untapped, and then pay 2 mana to cast Rest in Peace. I then pay 5 life to set aside 5 cards with Necropotence, and Zach reminds me to discard to Oppression, which has me exiling Sphere of Safety. Moving to combat, I hit Jameson for 7 again after paying the Propaganda tax. In my second main phase, I pay 1 more life to Necropotence before passing turn and putting the cards into my hand. Jameson plays an island for turn, and he casts Sleeper's Robe on Zur, putting the card he would discard on top. Jameson then swings Zur at Zach. He grabs Daybreak Coronet with the Zur on attack trigger and enchants him with it. Zach takes another 4 commander damage, and Jameson gains 4 life. He pays 3 of it in his second main phase to Necropotence, and puts the 3 cards into his hand at the end of turn. Zach discards the now pretty much useless Yawgmoth's Will to his Necrogen Mist trigger and draws for turn. He casts his own copy of Oppression, discarding a Sanguinate, but Jameson is not having it and casts Pact of Negation. Jason discards Magus of the Coffers to the Mist trigger and draws for turn. He's drawn easily 12 cards at this point, but hasn't drawn one of his 33 remaining lands in the deck. He activates the Cryptbreaker's ability, taking 1 to draw a card, and to the surprise of no one, it isn't a land. I discard a Plains to the Mist trigger on my upkeep and don't draw for turn. I play a Swamp and cast Ghostly Prison, but Jameson stops us with a Wizard's Retort. I discard Pontiff of Blight, and Jameson discards Vow of Duty. I then pay 4 life, setting aside 4 cards to Necropotence, and I pass through combat, putting the 4 into my hand at the end of my turn. Jameson discards a card and pays 5 to pay for the delayed cost of Pact of Negation on his upkeep. He plays a Swamp for his turn in his first main phase, and he moves to combat. He swings Zur at Zach, and tutors for an enchantment that costs 3 or less. He grabs Ethereal Armor, which pumps Zur by a further +7/+7. Zach, convinced he's already got 10 commander damage from Zur, dies to commander damage, when in reality I just think he wanted out of the game at this point. Jameson also gains 11 life, and in his second main phase, Jameson then casts Pariah on my Enchantment Spirit token, and pays 6 life to put 6 cards into his hand at the end of turn. Jason draws for turn and finds the 3rd land. He then activates Cryptbreaker's ability, losing 1 life and tapping 3 zombies to draw a card. He then casts Murder to kill Zur in his main phase, and discards a Swamp, which I suppose he must have drawn earlier. I play a Swamp for my turn, and I cast Luminarch Ascension. I then cast Wrath of God, and forget to discard to the Oppression trigger because I'm a dirty cheater. All the creatures get destroyed. Jameson plays a Drowned Catacomb as his land for turn, and recasts Zur, taking 3 from the hull once more. I respond to the beginning of his combat step by casting Anguished Unmaking on Zur. I take 3 from the spell, and I discard an Obsidat's Aid, but Jameson passes too quickly, and I put a counter onto the Ascension before finalizing my discard decision. Jason plays a Swamp for his land for turn, and he casts a Josu Ves, Lich Knight unkicked. He discards Lord of the Undead to the Oppression trigger, and passes. I add another counter onto the Ascension at the end of his turn. I play a Plains for my turn, and recast Daxos, discarding Stony Silence to the Oppression trigger. I pay 3 life to Necropotence to put 3 cards into my hand at the end of my turn, and I pass. Jameson plays an Isolated Chapel as his land for turn, and he casts Preordain, discarding Azorius Signet. He scries 2, and puts 1 on top and 1 on the bottom, drawing the card he put on top. Jameson then casts Scroll Rack and discards, or rather puts the card on top thanks to the Library of Lang. He then activates the rack and sets aside his hand to draw that many, then puts the original cards from his hand on top of his library. He passes, and the Ascension gains another counter. Jason draws for turn and moves to combat. He swings Josu Vess at me, and I activate Daxos' ability to make an enchantment spirit token, and decide not to block, taking the hit of 5. In Jason's second main phase, he casts Phyrexian Arena, discarding Whisper to the Oppression trigger. I play a Fetid Heath for my land for turn, and cast True Conviction, gaining another experience counter. I discard my Thought Vessel, and I move to combat. I pay 4 to swing Daxos and the Spirit token at Jameson. Jameson takes 16, 6 of which is commander damage, and I gain 16 life, and I pass my turn. In his first main phase, Jameson casts Winds of Wrath to wipe the board of all creatures. He then activates his Scroll Rack and passes. At the end of turn, I gain my final counter to activate my Luminarch's Ascension, and I pay 2 mana to make a 4/4 Angel token. Jason loses 1 to his Arena trigger and draws a card from it, then draws for turn. He casts a Death Baron in his main phase, and he passes. For my turn, I waste no time dispatching Jameson with an Angel token, and cast a Runescarred Demon in my second main phase. I tutor for a card, but Jason has seen enough and scoops it up. Game review time. So there were definitely a few missed oppression triggers, which is unfortunate, but not ultimately game-changing in the end. I think this game showcased just how powerful Necropotent is, and I have a lot of sympathy for people who played when this was in Standard. It is gross. I want to say that Daxos performed very well, but honestly there wasn't much competition outside of Jameson, and he seemed to be focused on Dak anyway. This was near the end of the night, and I was severely dehydrated, so I wasn't keeping the best track of life totals, so unfortunately Zach did misunderstand that he wasn't supposed to die to commander damage. Even if he'd stayed in, I don't see him doing very much, as Black doesn't have a ton of ways to deal with Rest in Peace. Unfortunately for Zach, most of his draws were just basic swamps, something that Jason also desperately needed, although he drew a bunch of cards and no basic swamps. It seemed like the mono-black players each had something that the other one lacked. I think Jameson's Xur deck was probably one of the most fair Xur decks I've ever seen, as typically they tend to go for things that protect Xur, Necropotence, and then a way to win the game. Jameson plays it more as a straight Voltron deck, which was a refreshing change from the typical Doomsday builds that I've seen in the past. There's not much I can say about Jason's deck, since the fact of the matter is he didn't really get to play it. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/MTGMudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/MTGMudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.